Okay, this is a one-speaker meeting. Please welcome our speaker tonight, Carla.
Hi, everybody. My name's Carla Moore, and I'm an alcoholic. I want to thank Richard for inviting me out here to share with you guys tonight. It is always a privilege to be able to do this. And I feel like I've made a new friend. You know, we got to have dinner, and I got to get to know him a little bit better, and yeah. I mean, it just always is. And I'll tell you something. I don't think this is a case for me. I don't think I'll ever get to the point where I don't need to go to meetings. But I have seen people come by Alcoholics Anonymous, drop in for their annual cake, you know, and they're of that unique variety who seem to be doing okay without going to meetings. And what I'd like to just put out there is whether you're one of them or not, is that even if I never needed another meeting in my entire life, I owe Alcoholics Anonymous everything. I could never repay what Alcoholics Anonymous has given to me. And so I would hope that the old timers who are doing so well would stay in here and share what we found. And I hope that if you're new, you'll stay long enough to find what we found, because it really, really works. It works good. You know, it works good. It works so well that some of us think we can walk away and not come back. But I don't know. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. It has been the constant in my life since September 25th, 1987. It's been the thing that I do no matter what. It just really has. Job or no job, kid living with me, kid not living with me, boyfriend, no boyfriend, you know, whatever it is, job, no job, Alcoholics Anonymous is the constant. And I'm so grateful for that, because it's given me a foundation on which my life out of which my life has sprung. And I just, I wouldn't have even known to ask for what I've got today. And if you're new, I'm sure that thrills you to no end, but it's been true, you know, and there's been a lot of joy and a lot of heartbreak. You know, what Alcoholics Anonymous has given to me is the ability to walk through my life awake and alive and looking you in the eye and rolling with the punches when there are punches, and, you know, jumping for joy when there's that. And for that, you know, I couldn't ask for anything more. The best I'm going to get in this program is human being, and that's okay with me. That's been a lot of fun. Now, when I got here, I would have told you that I'm an alcoholic for all kinds of reasons. I had a dark, dramatic, violent, perverted, crazy family. If you had my family, you'd drink too. And now I've been around here long enough to know that a lot of people went through a lot worse than I did, and alcohol just doesn't do for them what it did for me. You know, it just doesn't. They might have taken a drink, they relax a little bit, then they get up the next morning, they go do what they need to do, and they grow up. And it just doesn't do it. And yet I've been around AA long enough now to have friends in Alcoholics Anonymous live charmed childhoods. They were loved, privileged, they had everything they wanted, everything they needed, and alcohol absolutely threw them to the floor too. So what I found is that it doesn't matter if if your bottom was a 6-inch carpet in San Marino or Venice Boulevard. We usually all come to that point in the big book where it talks about us knowing loneliness as few do. And for me, Alcoholics Anonymous, I mean, alcoholism has been that for me. And I don't want you to think it was all bad, though, either. 4th, 5th, and 6th grade elementary school, I had a great time. You know, I was out of myself a little bit. I loved sports. I mean, I'd figure out, we moved around a lot, so we went to a lot of different schools, and I'd figure out the currency of whatever it was that was going on there. If it was sports, I'd try to be the best in sports. If it was academics, I'd try to be the best at that. You know, I just had to be first and the most and in charge and on top. And, you know, and by the time 6th grade was over, I was really tired and I needed a drink. And, you know, that's how that went. And in fact, and sports was one of the last things I loved. I loved softball. I mean, I played on an inner city team, and I was really good at it. And it was one of those things that made my spirit soar. It was the last thing I wanted to let go of, and I really tried. Between juvenile hall and trips to jail, I was, you know, playing softball, and then it came to the you know, it always does. You know, alcoholism always asks for that last thing. You think you're not going to have to give this up, but then, you know, you always come to that table, and you're always having to lay that down too, right? And I remember in the spring of my 14th year, it was like May, and I had pitched and played shortstop in the Southern California Championship on this inner city team, right? I was the shortstop who made that winning catch, and I was carried off the field on the shoulders of my teammates, right? You know, just like that moment that you can't even rehearse, you can't dream it up, it happens. And just a few months later, October that very same year, I'm in a place called North Beach in San Francisco. I'm on Broadway and Kearny. There are some businessmen who propositioned my friend and I, and we said yes and did the next indicated thing, and boom, a whole new career path opened up. So spring of the year, my 14th year, winning the softball championship. October, not so much. You know, it just it changed fast, and I started living a day at a time in a way I've not had to live in a very, very long time. And I was letting old men stick needles in my arms, and it just seemed like the outsides were really starting to match the insides. It was the life that I knew that I needed to live, and you know, I would try to come back home and live with mom and live with dad, and the more I'd go out on the road, the less I was able to reintegrate back into my school. And I certainly wasn't going to tell you where I'd been on my summer vacation. I mean, that's for sure. So, you know, it just got like that. And when I was 15, the courts took over, and I was admitted to a mental hospital after 22 hits of orange crystal and a little flip out at the San Jose Medical Center, and you know, then going into the nut house. And you know, at 15 years old, I was already restless, irritable, and discontent. Cliff R. talks about being a scream without a mouth, you know, and that's how I felt. I was alternately violent and withdrawn by then. They were giving me daily nutritional supplements of Thorazine, Mellaril, Valium, Dalmane sleepers. They weren't talking to me a lot about alcoholism. They were talking to me about disorders. I was a very disordered-looking child. I became intimately familiar with 5-point restraints in that hospital, and I was supposed to be there 2 weeks. I ended up being there for a year. So just sort of moved in, you know, made myself at home. And if you don't want to go crazy in the nut house, you got to get busy. And one of my favorite ways to be busy was the boys. You know, I loved all the boys, but my favorites were those sexy, smoldering types. You know the kind. They're just sitting back there simmering. You know, you just really don't know when they're going to pop. You know, and now back then I found it very exciting, but today I know that feeling as fear. And you're always having to say goodbye to guys like that in the nut house, because they're always, you know, their next move is YA. And so they, you know, get hauled off. And like my first boyfriend was hauled off to YA for throwing a chair through the window, and my next boyfriend was hauled off for throwing a nurse through the window. So that was progressive too. And you know, I love the stay in the nut house. I love to talk about the nut house because it just characterizes. You can just multiply that by 100, and that was me just years later, right before I got sober. You know, just the thinking. I still can't outrun my own thinking. I cannot outrun my own head. And you know, so the same thing that's thinking up the problem is still trying to think up the solution, and that's how it looked. You know, I don't know about you, but I've always thought I should have a soundtrack to my life. You know, music playing in the background of all this drama that's going on. You know, did you ever? Yeah, me. I did. And I remember one afternoon I was sitting outside the girls' unit on the smoke break bench, and I was smoking my tragic cigarettes, and I was watching my boyfriend Terry being cuffed and escorted off by security. You know, he's on his way to YA. He's the one who threw the chair through the window, and I was sitting there just smoking away. You know. And I could hear just inside the girls' unit Diana Ross singing at top decibel, "Touch Me in the Morning," then just walk away. You know, it just hurts so good. It just hurts so good. And it took a while to realize. It took a long time for me to realize that I was brokenhearted and blue before I ever had a real date. You know, here's where it happens, in between my ears. You know, that's where the drama is and where everything ain't happening. It's just right there. And, you know, you don't have to wait for long. There's always another boyfriend coming through the nut house. And And something it took me a very long time to learn is that I was always searching for the counterfeit, even back then, searching for it to come from out there that's going to make me feel better. What's the next thing, and I'm always half a bubble off what it is I think I'm looking at, I mistake brute strength for strength of character. I mistake sex for love. I mistake arrogance for confidence, and as soon as I get it up close to me, I get it in my life, then it turns to dust because it's not real. It's not the thing, and it's never going to come from out there, and if it does, it's never going to be enough. I had to come to Alcoholics Anonymous to find that when I give from here, that it's an inside job. When I give from here, that gaping hole in my soul gets smaller. When it comes from out there, it's just not the same. It's just not right. And I went from the girls unit to the co-ed unit to the intensive care unit, and I know today it was supposed to be the other way around, but I wasn't paying attention. I just didn't care, even with all the trouble that it caused, even with where I was, alcohol was still my best friend. It was my higher power. It was liquid cool, liquid maturity. It was liquid smoothed out the edges of my life. And it was a thing that was working. And I'd find my way over the wall or under the gate or out the front door sometime. I'd wear my street clothes under my pajamas, and sometimes they'd walk us through the lobby, and boom, I'd make a run for it. Sometimes I'd make it and sometimes I wouldn't, but it was always worth a shot. And, something to do. And all male staff to ward wherever Carla is what I used to hear, and then they'd come around and we'd get the big shot of Thorazine, and it would be over for a little while, and a lot of drama. I met the love of my life on the intensive care unit. This was not a treatment center. There was a guy, I remember sitting on the day room couch right in front of the TV, where I usually was, casts on both my arms up to my shoulders because I'd been cutting too, and that was sweet, 16. And there was a man who walked in the day room one morning, and he turned around and he sort of squatted in front of me, ripped off a big fart, and then he said, "You are thinking of real butter, little girl." And so those were my roommates. So it gave me pause to wonder. I started to wonder if I wasn't just going to be one of those little nut house lifers over a long period of time. Was this who I was? And there was something inside me that sort of saddened and almost resigned myself to being that. So I did the best I could with it. I met the love of my life on the intensive care unit, like I said, and I don't know what he was thinking. He saw me on the day room couch, casts on both of my arms. I don't know what it was that looked across the room, and he said, "Yeah, her, I gotta have her." That's a whole other, and I went over the wall with him, and about 2.5 weeks later, my probation officer knew exactly where to find me, and it took me a little while to realize. I think he called her, I was 16, he was 22, I was coming off Thorazine, he introduced me to cocaine, and woohoo, I think it was just too much of a contrast for him, really, and please come get her, she's right here. And so, back into the juvenile hall, and always sitting in front of a judge, waiting for placement, where am I going next? And then a rehab, and juvenile hall again, and then I ended up in a girls' home in Pasadena, and I met my roommates there, and I've always been a sort of a seeker. I've always had my head turned towards something that's a little bit bigger than what it seemed like on the surface of as a human. I loved thinking about contemplating the stars. I loved spiritual stuff. I loved the idea of a loving God. I had felt the presence of God long before I ever took a drink. I felt that presence, but alcoholism has been the only thing that has driven me to my knees enough for me to bother to spend any time trying to maintain that contact with God. That's the deal for me, and that's why I'm here. Everything I do in Alcoholics Anonymous still is about maintaining that fit spiritual condition, so I don't have to look at that first drink, because it's that first one that takes me. And I don't ever want to get to the point where I feel the need to override all of that stuff back to the first drink, and I know it can happen. So I'm in this girls' home, and I've met my friend, and we're talking about God, and we're talking about where can we go, and I've always been in love with the spirit of the 60s. I was 12 in 1969, so the 60s were over when I got out in the world, but I still loved what I thought they might have been. People stood up for things in the 60s, and there was peace and love and flowers and Traffic and Grateful Dead and all of that stuff going on, and they said, that's in Oregon. They've all gone up to Oregon, and we said, okay, let's go up to Oregon where God might be, and we moved up there to Eugene, Oregon, planted a little garden in the front yard of this house where we were renting. And, that's where I learned that in Springfield, Oregon, when they talk about hoeing, they mean with a garden tool, a real one, and different perspective. Two things happened that were significant that I could see looking back, and one was that if I wasn't going to be doing what I'd been doing for a living, I couldn't always afford to drink the way I needed to drink. And when I have no booze, I've got no spiritual solution, no God, no steps, no fellowship. I am restless, irritable, and discontent, very hard to get along with. And when I can drink the way that I need to drink, I'm always overshooting the mark. And so those things were happening at 17 years old, long before I was ready, willing, or able to do anything about that. I was willing to write it out. And my friends had asked me to leave, as did many friends after that, and I ended up living back with my father, and I lived with him for a few months, and he finally had to ask me to leave. I sat on his couch and I drank for the few months that I was there, and right before my 18th birthday, he said, I can't watch you die, and I'm not going to help you do it. You got to go. And on my way out the door, all I could think of was that one of the counselors at the rehab had told me I was a great actress. And I know today I must have misunderstood, but I ended up on Hollywood Boulevard. And there's not a lot of auditioning going on out there, just in case you're contemplating. And, for a very small amount of money, I was getting into strange cars with strange men doing strange things. And, starting my days off with a pint of Popov vodka, and I would go wherever the day took me. And some days it was a party, and some days it was surviving. And sometimes you just roll out of that car, and you get up, you fall down, weird things happen out there, and you take a drink, and then you just move on. And there was not a lot of hope about it getting any different. And I met a man a few months into that, walking down Hollywood Boulevard, and saw the light in his eyes. I didn't realize it was orange sunshine, but we hit it off. And I moved in with him that night, and I didn't even know his last name. And 6 weeks later, he's asking me to leave, and I still don't know his last name, but I like to bring him up because years later, he was someone who came up on my 8-step list, too, someone who was very clearly I owed amends. I had run through his life in a very short time, spiritually, mentally, physically, materially, in every single way, and he'd been nothing but kind to me, so he came to my mind very clearly, but I couldn't find him. I went through my whole first year of sobriety, the last part of my first year, and looking for him, and my sponsor finally said, you're just going to have to set that down. You're going to have to, change your own behavior now, and hopefully you'll run into him later and you can do something about that. But, today you can start by trying to be a friend to a man in a vertical fashion. Why don't you start there? And practice these principles in your relationships. And, all these years later, I have men friends, I have women friends. I know how to be a friend, I know how to have a friend. And that's the truth. And but right before my 13th AA birthday, I had to go give a talk on the other side of town. It was a hot Sunday afternoon, and I didn't feel like going. And thank God you guys have taught me it's not how I feel, it's what I do that matters. And I gave that talk, and of course I felt better. And when the meeting was over, the line came through, the thank you line came through, and this guy stopped and he said, "Hey, where were you in 1976? And it was a guy from Hollywood Boulevard. And he was standing there with 8.5 years of sobriety, and I with almost 13. And see, only a very well-organized, smart God could carry off something that I, in all my efforts to do that in my first year, couldn't get it done. And then it walked up to me. And that's what really makes me appreciate the mystery all the more these days later, is that God's timing is a little different than mine, but I have learned to trust his, and I know that he can make things happen. And so I got to make those direct amends. And he said, "Oh my God, Carla, that's long forgiven, long forgotten. I just can't believe you're still alive." And it's true. If we're in this room tonight, we're the lucky ones. We're the lucky ones if we're sitting right here, and we can stay. We can stay, and I'm not going to promise you it's going to be comfortable. I'm glad they didn't promise me it was going to be comfortable. Having everything about the way I think, the way I do things, the way I see things, having all of that changed is very uncomfortable. It's damned uncomfortable. But they just said, if your ass is falling off, bring it here, and we'll teach you how to sit a new way. And I had to come in here and learn how to look bad in Alcoholics Anonymous, or at least how I felt bad, And I can't think of a better place, to shake it out and to hang in. And I remember, I loved it. I just love the story. I was thinking about the other day. We were on our way to a workshop. I had to do this workshop, and I was working with this newcomer, and she was just sick and shaking, and she couldn't stop drinking. She was still drinking up until like that morning. And she called me, and she was trying to say, "Well, I'm sick," like that's going to be a deterrent to one of us. Sit there, you just clean. I just handed her a brown paper bag. I said, "Sit in the back and, use this." And we went off to the workshop. I just love that. You guys didn't care when I got here what I looked like, and then the night that I came in, the night of my last drink, my sponsor picked me up. She sat with me while I emptied out my last 2 beers, and she brought me up to the big book study that night. And you guys didn't even wait till I got sober. You asked me if I wanted to pour coffee on Tuesday, and I thought, geez, somebody thinks I want to be here on Tuesday. That's awesome, you know. And I was in bad shape that I don't want to describe from here, but. You guys were, you know, this is the best place to be sick, you know, I just think, and the best place to get better. Anyway, that was a long time to come, and I spent the rest of that year in Hollywood, and I hooked up with another guy from another rehab, and told you the rehabs are full of boyfriends, and we loved the idea again of peace and love and all that stuff. We just couldn't stop knocking the hell out of each other really long enough to implement the principles fully of peace and love, and so we beat each other up and down the California coast and pitched a tent in the mountains in southern Oregon and lived up there till the rains came, and then moved into a roofless cabin, threw a plastic tarp over the top, called it a skylight until the baby came. And you know, then we had this little girl, and I thought having this little girl was going to change us, you know, and we were drinking, you know, homemade wine, homemade beer, homemade grain alcohol, I mean, because it's natural and much better for you. And she got in the way of one of our fights, and I took her up to Idaho, where it's got to be better somewhere else. You know, I'm a runner from way back. All it really takes for me, even these days, is a long, slow train whistle and a Willie Nelson song, you know, and I am on the road again. I just want to go. You know, it's just that these days I want to come home, too, you know, and I have a home to come to, which is nice. You know, I like living indoors. It's great. Running water, indoor plumbing, all that stuff, you know. The bathroom used to be a shovel, and so we're up in Idaho, and my daughter's one of those kids that you see in her T-shirt and underwear and yesterday's lunch going on the front of it because the mom's not paying attention, you know, and I'm drinking scotch. I've got 2 jobs up there in Idaho, and I'm still not bringing home enough money to pay rent for more than a week at a time, and we're living in the little rent-by-the-week motels up there, and you know, after a while, of course, Idaho's not working either, and we're back down in L.A. I'm renting a room from my aunt in Covina, and I've got a job in Hollywood tending bar. One more time, not a bad place to work, just it's me, I'm the common denominator. Now, it never occurred to me not to drink on those jobs. Why else would you have those jobs? And my daughter was almost 4 years old by then, and every afternoon I'd kiss her goodbye, and I'd take off from that house in Covina, and I'd stop at the halfway point, which was a bar in Arcadia called the First Cabin, and I'd stop in there, and I'd have my primer drinks, those shots of Cuervo Gold and Bud Backs, and drink those and get primed up and ready to go do my shift in Hollywood. And every day I did that for months until one afternoon I kissed my girl goodbye, and I went to that same bar in Arcadia. I had those same shots of gold and same Bud Backs, and you know, the only difference on that day then I can figure out between that day and the day before was 24 hours, because I didn't hate that job in Hollywood, and I didn't love my daughter any less on that day than I love her today. But I sat on the bar stool and I was drinking those drinks, and I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop even long enough to get up and go take care of business in Hollywood, nor could I go back and see how my daughter was doing. I sat on the bar stool and I lost them both in one fell swoop. The kid and the job were gone. And I sat and I lived off the kindness of strangers there in that little area in Arcadia for about a month until I fell into another job at another dive bar. And you know, every night about midnight I'd hear that band playing, you know, and it would be like I'd had a couple of cycles of drinking all that day, and so now midnight the alcohol's not working so good anymore, you know, and that stuff is starting, and I can feel my gut wrench and my throat close, you know, and I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt you could walk my daughter up to me and say you can have her back if you'll stop drinking. I knew that that wasn't going to happen. Alcohol had become my master, and I couldn't have told you that even then back then, but I know that today. I know that if Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't remain my priority, alcohol will again become it. And it's okay with me. That's okay. This is a small, fun price to pay, you know, for the life that I have today. I thought getting married might be the answer. There was a man coming around bringing me food. I thought, okay, I'll marry you. And I thought if I made my life look like I thought yours was, maybe that would fix it, right? To get the kid back, take care of his kids, have an apartment, you know. And we got married about the time we should have split up, and we moved into this little apartment. And that's all that, you know, just more of the same. You know, we became an active household. 7 a.m., I'm cracking open those tall Budweisers. We bought ourselves a big gun to protect ourselves from the night stalker, and the only people we turned that gun on was each other. I just tried to get to it first, and I threw the first punch in that relationship, and my first exposure to AA was after one of our fights. We were at the bar where we drank, and we were fighting over whether or not I should get off the bar stool. And I lost that fight and ended up with some black eyes and broken ribs, and not a lot of people feeling sorry for me in that bar, just glad I was leaving. And he picked me up and he took me to the hospital and got me fixed up. And And then he brought me home, and he had to leave for work that weekend. And before he left, he set me up with a giant ice chest full of beer and a bottle of Beefeater gin. And now I'm drinking gin because tequila had been making me really mean. You understand? And so I'm home and I'm drinking and dialing. And I don't know if you've ever done that. And I don't know all who I called. But I called a battered woman's shelter somewhere in there, and I asked the woman who answered the phone to fix my life, and she asked me if I'd ever been to an AA meeting. Now, I don't know how she made that leap, but she did. And I found an AA meeting not far from where I lived, of course, and went down there, and two very kind women sat me down and gave me the newcomer packet, a cup of coffee and a tissue, and I was feeling very sorry for myself, and sat there and I listened to a woman talk just like you guys are tonight. And the one thing I didn't walk into that room with that night was readiness or willingness to do much else, much to change. And I heard that woman say that somewhere during her drinking career she switched to beer, so I did. And I walked out of there thinking, hey, I'll tell you to switch to beer. So for another couple years, that's what I did. I drank beer. And it was a welcome thing to my body. I mean, I was pretty sick and pretty tired, and beer just made me feel like I was controlling my drinking. You know, it was kind of soothing to my body, and it, you know, it got me where I needed to be in a softer, easier, softer way. And we got evicted from that apartment, and ended up living in a little apartment across town in Pasadena for one more year, until finally the cops are in the driveway one Saturday afternoon. The neighbors are peeking out the window wondering what's going on at Charlie and Carla's house one more time. The kid's 10 years old, and she's standing over in the corner in her mismatched clothes and her unkempt hair, and she got that look of fear in her eyes one more time. And I can't even try to tell her it's going to be any different, because it hadn't been different in a very long time. And so finally the cops left, the husband left, they took the gun, everybody's gone, and I'm sitting there. And, you know, I was in a better financial position than in that little place than I had been in a very, very, very long time. I had a car, I had a job, even though I was hanging on to it by a thread, and I was living in that little apartment, and I had the kid back, for better or worse. And I knew that it was just a matter of time before it all went away. And I was dying on the inside. Well, I was dying in every way, spiritually, physically, mentally, as much as ever. And I knew it was a matter of time before all of that stuff was gone. And my first sponsor told me if I wanted to effect a conscious contact with a power greater than myself, that I could start by counting the coincidences that happened in my life. And one of the first ones I could count was that I had moved in next door to a woman who had 5 years of sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. And she had seen and heard the fight go down, and she came and knocked on my door a few days later, and she sat on my couch and she told me her story, just one alcoholic talking to another. And in her story I could tell she used to drink like me, and over the last year I'd seen that she wasn't drinking like me at all. And it wasn't bothering her, which impressed me. You know, it wasn't bothering her she wasn't drinking anymore. And I don't know how that happens. You know, when I don't have a drink, I got no spiritual solution, no steps, no fellowship, no God, no way to handle sobriety. I feel like you've stripped the coating off my wires. You know, I feel oversensitive and underloved. I don't know what you meant by that or why you looked at me that way. And it just doesn't get any better from there. And so I don't know. I don't know if I'm just one of those people that needs, you know, I'm thinking back before I drank, I was in the nut house and they were giving me all the other stuff. So I'm not sure. I'm happy to report all these years later that the steps have been every bit as big as they've needed to be. You know, all it's taken is everything I've had. And like I said, it wasn't comfortable all the time, but it certainly has been worth it. Every step I've taken up till now has been absolutely worth it. And God, I hope you stay long enough for it to happen for you. I got a sponsor. I had to drink one more time at 89 days, and I stayed out for about 24 hours, and I was lucky enough to come back in. Not everybody is, and I want to just say that, you know, we all have a way out, but not necessarily a way back in. And I have buried a lot of friends who that's happened to, and funny how that just doesn't scare us. You know, it's just alcoholism is a badass disease. I took the steps with my sponsor, and after a couple of years, I had you guys, and my daughter didn't have anybody, and she had joined a gang. She was coming home at all hours of the night, beat up and bloody, and it was time to get her some help, you know. And I'd been busy being wonderful in Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, 2 and 3 meetings a day, and that's when I was taught that on page 19, not page 163, it says that a more important demonstration of our principles happens in our homes, occupations and affairs. And if I'm only doing it in these rooms, I'm only half doing it. And I'm not saying not to go to meetings, that's not what it said, but I had to stop going to 3 every day, and I had to go home and take this into my home and be a mother. I learned how to be a mother in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I had to put her in a treatment center for about 6 months, and it was for me to show up there, and that was where those amends in the dark came, It was like, it didn't matter. I couldn't say, well, if I have a relationship back with my daughter, then I'll make these amends. It was just, no, you make the amends anyway, and whatever happens, happens. But it was for me to do that, and you guys taught me that mountains are moved a spoonful at a time, and it was for me just to do every day spoonful just as good as I could. And she came back out and she wanted to go live with her dad, and I stayed busy in AA, and I was getting better jobs, and things were looking up in that way. There were ups and downs, but I was getting, I was paying rent more than a month in a row and all that stuff. That was great. I liked that. And when I was 5 years sober, I had this expectation too. Somewhere I didn't know I had adopted it, but somewhere along the line I thought that now that I was sober, that everybody was going to be good. That I was somehow the only. I don't know. I just can't even believe the extent of this delusion. But I turned 5 years sober, and she was living with her dad by then. She wanted to do that for a while, and I came home from the gym one night and went to bed as usual, and woke up in the middle of the night to a man standing over my bed with a knife to my neck and his hand over my mouth, and he said, "Don't say a word or I'll cut your head off." And he took the telephone cord and he tied my hands behind my back, and he raped me and he robbed me that night in my room. And I want to tell you, at 5 years of sobriety, I had a much bigger God than I got here with. When I got here, I was what the 12 and 12 calls the bewildered one. I just had all these different ideas of God, but couldn't get really one good one. I was just confused, bewildered. And a good friend of mine said, "Why don't you just call him God and let him get as big as he needs to be in your life?" And over time that has happened. Like it says in the chapter to the agnostics, all it takes is just the smallest idea, the tiniest bit of willingness to look in that direction, just to look in a different direction, and then it's grown from there. And so at 5 years of sobriety, there is a calm. I do know that things are going to turn out the way they're supposed to. God is or he isn't, and I choose to believe he is, and that things are going to turn out the way they were supposed to, whether I liked them or not. And there still was a God. And so in the meantime, though, I'm a little bit nervous. I mean, it didn't take the fight or flight away. I'm human, and so I'm wondering how this is all going to turn out, sort of. And we got in a little fight, and he ended up going out the same window he came in, and it turned out that I had known him. I'd watched him get sober about 30 days before I did. I watched him get his life, his wife, his kids, and everything back, and then I watched him join the church, leave AA behind, and when he went out like that. And what I choose to learn from that is that while the big book tells us to be quick to see where religious people are right, this is the place where I learned the terms and conditions of my disease. This is the place where I learned that I'm not one of those people who can go home after a Sunday sermon and have a glass of wine. This is where I learned that I can go anywhere I want to and worship. I can go somewhere different every day or nowhere. I mean, this has been enough for me. I read a lot of spiritual books. I avail myself of a lot of spiritual teachings. And the things that seem to ring true, the things that seem to blend in, that overlap. I love when everybody thinks that they've got the best, when everybody's sort of saying the same thing anyway. I kind of like that. And but I have to come to AA. And anyway, my sponsor told me I was going to have to forgive this guy, that we're people who can't handle even seemingly justifiable resentments. And I know that she's right. I know that 5 years of sobriety, I'm one of those people, and yet this guy had scared me, and when I get scared, I get mad, and anger is one of my favorite. At 5 years of sobriety, anger is like, it still makes me feel focused, and like you can't hurt me, and like I got a purpose, and it's working, or it used to work up until then. Funny how everything works right until it doesn't work anymore, and now it's not working. It's like a suit that doesn't fit anymore. It just won't. And I don't know how I'm supposed to do this. And my sponsor gave me the 7-step prayer as a mantra. I mean, I had it before, I'd used it before, but now I was using it all the time. And I found that forgiveness in the courtroom, or the beginning of that forgiveness, as part of the defense. The guy had a lot of the guys I had known in the bars years before get up and testify on his behalf about who I used to be in the bars. And I used to think I was just going in there for a couple of angry drinks, and I'd go in there and I'd have my drinks, and then I can't stop, and I got to have a few more, and I got to have a few more, and then anything could happen. It wasn't always my intention to go in there and sleep with everybody that was sitting there, or have all of those things happen. Sometimes I just went in there to chill out, and everything else happened. And that's what they talked about. And so by then I'm working at an investment firm downtown LA, and the division head of the department where I was working volunteered to come and testify on my behalf as to who I was at 5 years of sobriety. And this guy came in, and they told him all about who I used to be. And he said, yeah, but she shows up early, she stays late, and she was where she said she was. And see, that's Alcoholics Anonymous speaking for itself. He didn't have to be coached. He just got up and told the truth as he had experienced it through me. And then it was my turn to testify, and I got up and I saw him sitting at the defense table, and it's a place where I've sat and I could sit again, and that was the beginning. You know, I knew, and like it says in our book, you know, I knew that he was sick like me. He was just perhaps spiritually sick just like me, and maybe among other things, what stood between him and I at that moment was a drink. And I knew that if I were to go out, it might not be rape, but it could be something equally as destructive, and that I could be sitting in his very seat again. And that's where it just started, you know, just a little bit of alcoholic compassion, you know, like a crack of light under the door, you know, where it's the beginning of the freedom happened. Now, I didn't walk out of that courtroom that day and angels sang hallelujah and I was done. It took about 18 months, you know, for that fear to finally dissipate and for the nightmares and all the stuff attendant to something like that for it to finally go. But it did, in fact, go. And I want to tell you, he got 20 years and he did 13. And the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous was there when he went in. And the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous home group clear on the other side of town, still AA though, they swooped in around me when he was getting out and made sure that I knew I was safe. That's the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'd like to tell you that for the next 14 years, you know, I've been ever so grateful and nothing else bad has happened, but, you know, the book says that troubles arise out of ourselves, and I caused myself a lot of trouble. I've bankrupted myself at 10 years sober, but, you know, to balance that out, my daughter came back to live with me, and I got to be present at the birth of my first grandson. My second grandson's 7 years old, you know, and she's allowed me into her life. I mean, she's forgiven the stuff, you know, and in my daughter's life, I had become the very parent that I swore I would never be. You know, I had to come in here and tell you guys I was putting my hands on my daughter, and I had to keep telling you that until I stopped, until I changed. And she's forgiven me that stuff, and she allows me to be with the kids, you know, on my own. And they just know me as Grandma Carla, and I'm a good grandma. I'm a better grandma than I ever was a mother, and yet, you know, she loves me and trusts me today. My father doesn't have to sit up nights anymore watching the news to make sure his daughter's name isn't on the list of the victims of the serial killers of the day. You know, he sleeps well now, and he knows it's you. He can't explain AA, he can't explain alcoholism, but he gets that nobody in my family has ever said, no, don't go to the meeting. Ever. And my mom was the hardest. You know, about 2 years before I got sober, my baby sister committed suicide at the age of 17, and it took her all weekend to die. And while we were all at the hospital, I'd leave the waiting room and I'd go out to the car and I'd drink, and then I'd come back in and I'd just rake my mother across the coals and speak to her in a way a daughter should never talk to her mother, especially when her baby lay dying in the next room. And I don't know how you make amends for that, except that I started to call her once a week and try to find out how I might add to her life instead of take. And over time that healed, and so much so that about 5 years ago when my baby brother died of this disease, he was 30 years old, 6'10", 160 pounds, when he lay on life support in a Spokane hospital, little pinholes in his heart, and he wasn't going to stop drinking. He's been doing crank, and he wasn't going to stop drinking. When he mercifully died, I got to go up and be the kind of a daughter my mother needed while she buried yet a second child. And I don't know what kind of pain that is for a parent, but I know that this time, because of AA, I got to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem. I know that there's a God today because he answers questions I don't ask out loud, and I know that he'll do that for you too. You know, Vincio, who just passed recently, I heard him when I was newly sober, and he'd always get at the podium and he'd say, there is a God, and something's going to happen. Something's going to happen, and everybody would get real quiet. That is so personal to you that there will be no denying that there is a God that not only can but will help you. And then the room would get real quiet, and he'd say, I don't know what it is. But there's one for each of you, and I've taken that with me, you know, and my God has just gotten bigger, and I've learned to appreciate the mystery more. Now I'm going to say this one last thing because it just characterizes who I am today, and then I'll sit down because I know I'm running over a little bit. And I don't always see things coming. Just about 3 years ago, I wandered into a ballroom dance studio. It's like I said, my God sometimes takes care of things I don't know are supposed to be happening. I'd become so rigid over time. I'm a very hard worker, and I get perfectionism confused with perfect. And perfectionism is not being perfect. It's just being obsessed with the idea of becoming perfect, and you never will. And so, it tends to make a person rigid and, walk around like you've got a sort of a stick up your ass. And, there's a difference between hardcore and idiotic. And so I didn't know I had become that way until I tried to do the rumba, really. It was just as simple as that. I did not know it would come through dance. My teacher we were about halfway through this lesson, and he slapped his forehead and he said, "Oh, Carla, do not try to dance like a good girl. I don't think they will believe you anyway." That's a true story. That just rolled off of his tongue, and I have to. The ninth chapter of our book says that our dark past will become our greatest assets in God's hand, and that's a paraphrase, but I know that mine is exactly that. It's been woven into a huge tapestry that is my life. It's there for those who need to see it, and yet I walk a free woman in the real world, Dancing keeps me exactly in this moment. If I worry about the step that's ahead or worry about the one I just took, then I can't stay in the now, and now is exactly where I need to be. And, I learned how to do that here, and my friend Don Newcomb said that he was a little worried about that when I started because he thought it might take me away from AA, and he said, boy, he said, what I see now, though, is that little girl who went to North Beach had to step aside so the lady who dances could come out. And that's happened for me. I hope you stay long enough for that to happen for you, too. Thank you.